Okay, good afternoon, everyone. If you haven't made your way over and you'd like to hear, please come on over. We're just about to start our second panel of the day, Life Stories, Personal Narrative and Art. My name is Belinda Harrow, and I'd like to welcome you to the 8th edition of Art Now and today's panel. Art Now is presented by SAS Galleries, who are pleased to host an in-person art fair here in Regina. SAS Galleries is the not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting, developing, and encouraging the growth of Saskatchewan professional art galleries who exhibit and sell original works of art. SAS Galleries is grateful to its funder, Creative Saskatchewan, and we'd also like to say a special thanks to Assiniboia Gallery for contributing to the sponsorship of this panel. So we're here on Treaty 4 land. However, this art fair welcomes artists, galleries, and visitors from across Saskatchewan, including Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, which is the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabe, the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Dene nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. So we're here today to talk to three amazing artists. Art requires practice, study, effort, and dedication. Ideas don't magically pop into an artist's head fully formed, but are honed and crafted from life experience, relationships with family and friends, and time spent living on this land in our shared communities. Today, I'm so thrilled to be speaking with Audie Murray, Sylvia Ziemann, and Debbie Wozniak-Bonk about art's role as both a mirror to personal history and a bridge to the universal experience. So first I'll introduce our artists. Audie Murray is a visual artist who works with a multitude of mediums such as sculpture, media, beadwork, and drawing. She is Cree Métis from Lebret and Meadow Lake communities located on Treaty 4 and 6 territories, and is currently based on Oskanak Can you say that for me?
Oskanak
Astana-ka-Astetiki, which is the Cree name for Regina, which means pile of bones, which I think most people who live here know. Audie has exhibited widely, including the Ramey Modern in Saskatoon, the Vancouver Art Gallery, Centre for Contemporary Arts in Glasgow, which I've been to, and the Anchorage Museum. Murray is represented by, no, I don't know how to say the name of this gallery right. Fazakas Gallery, which is in Vancouver. So thanks, Audie, for coming. Sitting beside her is Sylvia Ziemann. Sylvia Ziemann works in sculpture, painting, drawing, and puppet film. Her studio production consists of miniature installations that incorporate sound and video. Recent work explores themes of urban paranoia and how individuals might respond to environmental challenges, such as caused by climate change, pandemics, and extreme conditions. She's ahead of her time. Your art caught up to the current.
Yeah, it did.
She currently teaches art at the University of Regina, and Sylvia is represented by Slate Gallery and has a piece that's up for you to enjoy later after the talk. Debbie Wozniak-Bonk is a prairie girl at heart, having been raised on a farm near Corning in southeast Saskatchewan. She graduated from the University of Regina with a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in painting. Since graduation, Debbie has had a successful career with many solo and group exhibitions, and she's represented by Assiniboia Gallery in Regina and has 2 pieces up on display. One has already been sold. So welcome to all our artists. I'm really happy to have you here today, and I'm excited to speak to you. So my first question, when we think about what influences your art making, Does your family past and your present influence your art practice? I think that's probably going to be a yes to most artists. I'm going to start with Audie. Audie, you study past beadwork by your family members. How do these pieces influence the art that you make?
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all here. I have my phone out just because I have a couple of notes. I'm not trying to be rude, just to let everyone know. But yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate being on this panel because I don't think I've ever talked specifically about like personal narratives within my art practice. It's usually just kind of like a line that I say when I'm introducing myself. So I'm really looking forward to kind of delving into this and hearing about other artists' perspectives. But to answer your question, Belinda, I'm always thinking of how and where I'm situated in this web of life. This includes folks that have come before me generationally and how they've done like a lot of work to create a space where I can work from. And then I'm also thinking about like future generations and my descendants and what I can do to hold that space. But I think a work that I want to talk about today is, to answer this question, is Holding Our Hands, which you can see on the screen here. And this is a piece that is a performance. And the performance includes gauntlets that my great-grandma had made in 1935 and exist in the museum in Meadow Lake. So we were able to loan these gloves to the Ramey Modern in Saskatoon, and I did a performance where I bundled them, like swaddled them like a baby, and created this moss bag that was the right size for these gloves and put them into the moss bag as a performance. And then so they were shown in the gallery bundled up. And so the viewer wasn't able to like totally see the gauntlets anymore. And because that wasn't important, the importance wasn't like putting those historical artifacts on display. The importance was like that act of care and having the ability to like choose the ways in which that I'm showing work done by my ancestors. But to be more specific about the question around beadwork, I am really privileged in having family members that are beaders, including my great-grandma on my paternal side and my great-grandma on my maternal side. And the imagery here is taken from the gauntlets that are wrapped up. So sometimes I like recreate the images of the beadwork directly when it makes sense, but most of the time I am not doing that. I am just kind of like doing research to kind of get to know myself more, which in turn like allows me to be a better artist, I think, and develop more of my practice.
So can you tell me what made this a performance? What did you do exactly with this in the gallery? You did the bundling in person? Or?
Oh yeah, so the way it was set up is the gloves were like in a vitrine in the space just on their own, and the performance was like taking them out of the vitrine and like doing the actual act of bundling. Really kind of like thinking about them as their own selves or like as a baby, and then putting them into the moss bag, which you can see here in the image, and then putting the moss bag onto a different plinth. So I was like moving the work from space to space, but also taking it out of a vitrine and allowing it like the space to kind of breathe and exist, but also concealing it in a way, which for me was like an act of care and love and a little bit of an act of defiance around archival spaces, I suppose. But there's a stereo here because there was also like the sound of Link Ray, if you know Link Ray's music, Son of Rumble, and it was slowed down to kind of give this like ghostly atmospheric sound to go along with like the bundling of these gloves. No.
Okay, thank you, Audie.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to Debbie. And I've got a piece, the first piece of hers up on the screen. Debbie, so thinking again about that idea of family past and present and influence on your art practice, your paintings often feature settings and locations that are connected to you personally. How does a painting, a location that connects you to you personally influence the making of that painting?
Well, I've always been affected by my surroundings, and I think it began as a child on my farm. So, well, as a child, I'd always go out and explore and take pictures, and I would sort of contemplate on those images and what they meant. And I've always hung on to those photos, and I continue to do that today. It's always exploring and almost building up sort of this visual dictionary of objects, and whether it's plants and trees and buildings, and then I've sort of expanded to the prairies, like the grain elevator. So that, yeah, it definitely affects my artwork, but then I don't want to just paint something just realistically, just based on a photo. So I want to put myself and my emotions and my ideas into it. So kind of altering it, and it becomes almost like a psychological landscape.
So tell us about this piece in particular. This was made while you were a student or around the time that you were studying?
Yeah, just finishing up university. So so in our pasture, there's all these sort of really old rock piles, and it was almost like an old divider of land. But at the time, I didn't know what it was. So I grew up with these, and they were kind of like in a row, and they're always so mysterious and very old-looking and covered with the lichens, and they always fascinated me because I didn't really understand what they were. But they were just, at one time when the land was cleared a bit, they would sort of pile these stones, but it was done so long ago that to me they looked really mysterious. Like, you know, maybe something was buried under there. What was the story? So that's where I kind of got the idea that even though it's like a simple rock pile, I transformed it into something else, a little more mysterious and interesting. So.
I have a relationship with this painting because it's in the Sask Arts collection,
yeah.
And it's much requested and always out. So do you want to talk a little bit about this piece? Because when I talked to you leading up to this, it gave me some new insight into the piece, which I'm going to be looking forward to sharing with whoever borrows this work in the future.
Yeah, so like I said, going to the pasture, I always loved the trees. They were my favorite, and especially the poplar trees. So I was looking at these trees, and to me, they really spoke to me and had personality. So you have to remember this, like I was young, and to look at something and see basically people in them, or youthfulness and middle age and old age. So I just got this idea in my head that I want to express the male relationships in my life through trees. So the biggest forefront poplar represented my dad, and then on either side are my two brothers, and then off to the side, kind of a glowing tree, is he was my boyfriend at the time, but my husband, and he's still here. We're still. So yeah, it's father, brothers, first love. So just seeing people in trees is, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so this piece is very large.
Yeah.
I should have put the measurements on it.
Four panels.
And it's in panels, which is great for us because we can move it in our regular van. But yeah, it has such a strong impact because it is so large. It's probably almost 2 meters across and 1.5 meters high. So the trees do have become like have a nice reference to the body because of the size of those works. And it is a little different than a lot of the work you do, which is more compact and smaller.
Yeah.
So talk about this. Trees are an ongoing
Yes.
theme
So
in your work.
when I graduated university and seriously started to paint, I was with the McIntyre Gallery here in Regina, and I really enjoyed being productive. So I've always loved just really getting in the studio and doing paintings, and I found that people really enjoyed my tree paintings. So I really explored it every which way, every type of color and mood. And so this one I was really focusing on the freshness of, early spring, beginnings of summer. And I usually tend to do that with my paintings, is really focus on one or two colors as a main theme and to really say something. So yeah, I painted trees for about 13 years. So, yeah.
I was saying to Debbie, when I look at her tree paintings, they really take me back to my childhood because I grew up in a small town and our trailer park was on the edge of the town, and then there was a field, cattle field, not grain farming. And as soon as the winter started to let up a little bit, we'd go, during those years, your parents would say, "Get out of the house, I don't want to see you for at least 5 hours." And we'd go out and we'd pack, apples or snacks, and then it felt like such an adventure to go out into those fields and look at the rocks with the lichen and go into those kind of Poplar Bluff areas. Always ended up getting a boot full, going through the ice, and it was probably pretty dangerous when I think about it. But I think it captures that and the sense of being kind of isolated, I think, because they're really a space that look like they haven't been impacted by humans very much. So yeah, really like your trees. So you're still working with trees?
Yes, yeah, definitely. They're always still, there. They're kind of a part of me because, like I said, as a child, that was sort of my playground, was being in the trees and willows and grasses. So it'll always be a part of me, and it's sort of almost like a thank you to nature for inspiring me, and it's always sort of my sanctuary or my inspiring place. So.
And we're including this one because it's sort of a transitional piece. Mm-hmm. This is a little piece that you've kept. It's in your home.
Yeah.
And it's quite small. So talk a little bit about this work.
Yeah, so this is actually based on a photo that I took in a town called Glenavon, which is fairly close to the farm that I grew up on. And I really liked how it looked like the nature was kind of swallowing or taking over this house. And I've always been fascinated by abandoned buildings, especially the farmhouses, because I know that someone once lived there and there was a whole life, and oftentimes a big family in this little house, and then whatever happened, they're gone, and the house stays, and then nature really starts to take over quick. Like, it's amazing how nature does that. So I just love this image and the mystery of it, and just that transition, and so.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sylvia. So, Sylvia, your sculptures and paintings often speak to large world events, but they're often set in a domestic environment. So, how has your experience as a mother, a wife, a caregiver, and a teacher influenced your art. And I think it's interesting when that dichotomy, thinking about big events, but within a home environment.
Well, I think that all of those big events affect us, whether we're aware of it or not, and sometimes we get very afraid, And I know in my daily life, having a family and kids and trying to be an artist and then seeing what's going on in the world, they all kind of combine in. And art is one of the best places where you can just go, oh, this is bothering me today, or this is what I'm thinking about, and then it builds up, and then you put this thing out there. So I think it's a combination of everything. I think as artists, we always put a little bit of ourselves into, whether we realize it or not, whether it's obvious or not, we put that into the work. This piece in particular, this unpaid work, was made. Well, it was made quite a while after I had kids. Previous to this piece, I had started working in miniatures, and I made this little home that had like a diaper area for the children and all kinds of things in miniature. And then up in the attic were all my art supplies.
Your mic up? Yeah.
Were all my art supplies. And it was called Postpartum, You Can Kiss Your Studio Goodbye. Because I realized once I had this kid, when my first child had colic, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't doing anything, I became a zombie. So I was doing all this work, and this piece here in particular, unpaid work, is it's a suitcase full of money, because a lot of mothering, well, you don't get paid to do the laundry and wash the floor and cook the meals and feed the baby and all that stuff. So I made this suitcase with miniature money, and in the back is a list of all the things that I did at the time, take out garbage, pay phone bill, buy bread, just a list of everything. And that was a good way for me to make art about what I was experiencing, right? So then it's not so bad when you're making work, right? And then this little miniature, sleep deprivation hallucinations, and they're small, they're like this big. I had a dream where I really wanted to make art again, but I was so consumed. At this point I had 2 kids, and so there's an iron there, and there's a painting that I'm ironing, and the high chair has paint splotches instead of baby food or the food that my kids were throwing while they were eating. It was a joyful time, but it was also really difficult to have a studio and make art for me personally, because it was so all-consuming with the kids. But I made small stuff, still made it happen, but I was coming from a place of making really big paintings and really installations, and so I had to shrink everything down. Right?
Yeah, so I was going to follow up with the scale question. Mm-hmm. Is that what drew you to working in miniature, just the
Yes.
practicality of being able to work on a tabletop?
Well, I actually literally had to give up. We lived in a very small apartment, and I had one of the bedrooms was a studio, and I literally had to give that up to make room for the kids. So I was making work like this outside with my tools and on the balcony and on the kitchen table. Yeah, so had to shrink everything down. But I could make art still. I figured you can still have a big impact in what you want to say on a small scale. It doesn't have to be big, right? As long as you're doing it. Yeah.
So another one here, path to individualization. And this is recent work.
Yeah. So I've continued to work in miniature because it's a cool space. You can put a lot into it. But these are actually quite big, and I've made quite a few of them, so they take up a lot of space. I used to think, work in miniature and then easy to store, but no, I've got stacks of miniatures all over the place. This was also came out of my experience of family life during COVID, when we're all trapped inside. Kids were at home; they're teen or young adults, and you're getting all the news and everything, and I couldn't go out, couldn't do anything, so I started making these. It was a series called Quarantine Diaries, and this one is a rabbit in bed, kind of looking out, and he's either kind of sick or hibernating or just, taking a break. And on the wall are little Post-it notes, and they all say, oh, have a better day, like words of wisdom, sort of, you can do it, or get up, but they're all quotes from sort of motivational speakers and things like that. So it's the idea of self-improvement, but then you're lying in bed and you're sick, and you've got a cold, and there's the drawer there with a whole bunch of Kleenexes in it, and mushrooms are growing up, and then there's a table of sort of, my animals and creatures usually have an antidote corner where there's a bottle of wine, pack of cigarettes, so there's an ashtray there with cigarette butts, and sort of addiction things that you use to cope with stress, or that I do sometimes, like, yeah. So definitely the domestic feel is in there. It's what I was feeling at the time or going through, and I was thinking about other people who, you want to do well, but then, pandemic comes and shuts everything down. So what do? You go interior, you go into the bed, you go into your room, pull up the covers and hope it goes away.
No, I made work set inside my house
Yes.
during the pandemic as well. I think a lot of artists did that at that time.
Yeah.
I think that's the last one. Yes.
Yep.
So thanks for that. So now I'm going to ask you, because you've talked a little bit about, most of you, about the beginning or what's influenced you. So how has your art developed over time? Like, how has it changed? Now, Audie's our youngest artist here, so it'll be interesting to see how you answer that question. But Debbie, your early work focused on nature, as we saw, influenced by growing up on the family farm. And then we see architecture and built structures begin to appear in your paintings. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how and why you chose these subjects, and to go from, I think your paintings really transform what is ordinary into something that's extraordinary by focusing on things that we see in the everyday. And I'm going to maybe follow up with something about color too.
Okay. So as a child, even just being so influenced by nature, and then as an artist, focusing just on the nature. So I did that for about 14 years. So I really explored it fully. But during that time, I was also so intrigued by abandoned farmhouses and barns and elevators. And then it really started to affect me because of just seeing what happened in Saskatchewan with farming, like kind of like the loss of the small family farm was really starting to disappear. And it started pretty much in the 90s. So as I got older and living in the city and visiting the prairies and seeing more and more farms abandoned and small towns shrinking and some small towns basically disappearing or no people living in them. So I felt like I had to start expressing that. And I think it just comes with age and wisdom and experience that you want to say more. I think that I had said enough about just painting trees, and I still love them, but I felt that there was something there. And I think even living in the city, because when I was 18, moved to the city, and I think structures and seeing them every day sort of became a part of my life too. And so this is kind of one of the first paintings of still that element of the tree, but then of the old abandoned house. And this was in a very small town called Candiac. And my husband and I would often explore there and take pictures. So I've actually documented some small towns as well, and the old elevators, so for like 20 years. So it's interesting to see even how some of them actually crumbled and fell, but I had documented them. And yeah, so this one, and I think that doors and windows are very interesting too, and they say a lot. Like, it's places that you can enter, and there's some mystery, and it speaks of, you know, a different place, or entering or leaving. And so this one I played with color, obviously. So most of my photos are taken during the day, but I really like, because you're going to ask about color, is using color to transform it into another time or place. So actually this is like of a sod house that's long gone now too, but the outside is the sod house, and you're looking into it, and then they had put a window, and then the moon kind of shining. So I enjoyed taking something that did exist and was real, but sort of turning it into something else. So yeah, and then actually that sod house was attached to that one, but the sod house was gone, and then the house was on fire. So one time and this farm is really close to where I grew up, and we actually witnessed the farm burn down, and I took these pictures. It just happened that day that for some reason it started on fire, and I took pictures. So it really just left such an impression on me, just the fire as a symbol, and just sort of even though there's warmth, it's, you know, destructive. And at the time, I was sort of experiencing a lot of emotions and going through some things, so I found it very therapeutic to paint fire. So
yeah, I think we see Heather Benning's dollhouse work,
Yep.
where it evolved and eventually was burned. You know, using fire is a way traditionally on farms to eliminate things they don't want anymore, sometimes set on purpose, sometimes not, and the effects of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it really does. I mean, she also makes work about losing family farms, and I think this piece has a lot of passion and impact. I also personally wanted to add this little one in, which I have and gifted to my niece. So I took this photo it's hanging in her, I don't know if I put the picture up in her bedroom, but so your paintings are often at night, and they have this fire element. So what's the difference between the role of fire in the previous painting and this one that you see here?
Well, I think this one is more symbolic of maybe a spark of hope. Like, even when I paint something that appears dark, like nighttime and mystery, like, it can be seen as maybe negative or spooky or scary, but to me, like, the night is so mysterious and interesting, and it's this transition before a new day. Or maybe the night doesn't have to be scary, especially when we have the comfort of home and light, and the fire is sort of like that hope and that safety and security. And so I think that's what I was trying to express in that the night isn't always scary, that there's, yeah.
Yeah, I think the fire pieces too, whenever you have the architectural elements, it refers to the human contact and what we've done on the land. But in these ones, it's so much more closely tied, because you know that there's somebody here, or somebody was here, or will be there again. So the human presence is that much more palpable, I think, in these.
Yeah, or even just the
works.
idea of the candle in the dark. You always hear that, to kind of never give up hope, or I always have hope for humanity, and even just our connection to land, that there's just so much going on, but I always have hope that, we'll sort of fix things and come together and learn to love the land and use it properly. And so.
Okay, Sylvia. So having a dedicated studio space, you've referred to it a little bit already, to work is not always easy to find. And can you tell us the pros and cons of working in a studio space outside your home, which you have done in the past, versus in your home? And actually, I'm going to open that question up to everyone, because I think, especially as artists who have families, I think this is something that a lot of artists think about. So would you like to talk? You brought some images of some of your studios.
Yeah. Well, this is a picture from Emma Lake when it used to operate as an artist studio. I would rent a space or go there for a couple of weeks when the kids were small so that I could get away. And my husband would take care of the kids, and then I could have a real studio and get some focused work done, which was really delightful. And so that's one of the ways that I got the space that I needed. Can you go to the next slide? Sure. And then I also, at our previous location where we lived, I worked in the garage. And it was a heated garage, which we built. But the problem with that is in winter you have to park the vehicles in there, and it's not really warm, the wind is there, the thing is blowing, it's uncomfortable, right? So I've had a number of different spaces like that. I've also worked in spare bedrooms and basements. I had a basement studio for a while. And they're never ideal, but now I do have a good studio. Oh, and that's the painting I was working on. Okay, so this painting too is like 8 feet by 6 feet. It's huge. And I rented a studio at the University of Regina, started it that summer, and then realized, oh, how am I going to get this home, and where am I going to put it, and how am I going to finish it? Like, what was I thinking, right? And so we had to strap it on the top of our van to get it home on a Sunday morning when there was no wind, But I wasn't thinking that way. I just thought, oh, big painting. I've got the studio for the summer. I'll do that. So I had to finish it in the garage, and it eventually got done, which is great. But studio space. It's taken me a while to figure those things out. And now we've moved, and I have like the perfect studio, but I had to wait until I turned 60 to actually have a studio that is spacious, good lighting, lots of place for storage, but a lot of place to do my sculpture, drawing, and painting, like everything that I like to do. So I think studio space is important, but if you don't have it, you can always get the work done somehow. But and working at home, I love working at home. I don't really like working outside because if I go to the studio, by the time I get to the studio, I might have lost the inspiration, or you get there and you start working and then, I forgot my whatever at home. So I've never liked having a studio outside of the space. I like living in it because I can wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh yeah, I can fix that thing now. I know what the solution is. Get my house coat on and go fix the piece, right? So I'm a homebody studio person, definitely.
I met you, I think, the first time because when I moved to Regina, at the time they had these summer studio spaces available that you could apply and get a space in. Yeah. Which was really nice because when I first moved here, I was in an apartment, and it was like a one-bedroom apartment. So that was really nice, and then had some interactions. Got to know people in the community, and then there was an expectation with it that you would kind of do a little critique at the end, walk around sharing what you did. So, there was always the good intention people who joined the program but never did a thing all summer. And then there was the people who, which for all kinds of valid reasons, just weren't able to make it work for them. And then, but it's nice to have that. But I also have a home studio. I'm a home
Yeah.
studio person. But sometimes you miss out a little bit on feedback, I
Yeah, and the
think.
community, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So how about you, Audie? You've probably, since you were in art school, had a few different workspaces. What works best for you, and what are you making art in now?
Well, exactly like what everyone else is saying, there's benefits, pros and cons to both spaces. I think I love a home studio mostly. I really resonate with what you said, Sylvia, like about losing your bedroom to to motherhood, essentially, your bedroom studio.
Well, you're a new mother, right?
Yeah, I'm a new mom. I have a 10-month-old, and when my partner and I bought our place, we were specifically looking for an extra bedroom so I could have a studio space at home. And then, like, right away, I found out that I wouldn't have access to that studio space at home, which is now a nursery. But it's okay. Like, you find places that work. So I do have like a little bit of an alcove in my home that is a studio. But I also am like really happy to have found a studio space that I share with another local artist, Holly Aubuchon. And that's really wonderful because I can kind of like spread out a little bit there. But do I make it there very often? Like, no, honestly, I spend most of my time at home in the home studio. But yeah, I've had lots of, as most artists, like lots of studios at school, kind of grimy, gross studios, a little bit nicer studios. And like, I feel like I'm in like a really good place right now having that like balance. But today is my studio day, and I totally just stayed at home, even though I had intentions to go into my physical studio. And also resonate with what you're saying about the big painting, because I have like a large shipment that came in today, which is like 2 mirrors that are 4 feet by 4 feet that are crated and like super heavy. And I can't get it into my studio space because I don't have like an elevator. I just have like a series of stairs that like get up to my studio. And no one is going to lift it up there. I'm not going to ask anyone to do that because that's cruel. So they're kind of just precariously like in our front porch right now. And that's probably where they will live. Yeah.
How about you, Debbie?
Well, I really love having an at-home studio. So when my husband and I bought our house, it's a kind of a small house with 3 little bedrooms, and I did have one of the bedrooms as a studio, which I loved. And then we had 2 children, and they've taken over. So we have our bedroom and the other 2. So basically, I don't have a proper studio. And I did try renting a space at Flatlands. And so it's in the city here. It's a big warehouse, kind of like a communal space. And I did, for the most part, like it. I was there probably 5 or 6 years, and it was a nice space. But I found it difficult to keep running there and taking paintings back and forth. So I still had to work on stuff at home and there. And I just found it to be too much. It's like, I just want to be at home. So now I'm just kind of in my basement in a small space. It's not quite proper, but I just try to be positive and patient and hope my children leave, or the first one leaves. So he's 20, so he's getting there. Like, I love him. I want him there, but I really can't wait till he goes, and then I'm going to have a studio.
I went and visited Debbie in her house, and I so admire your ability to make work in your little nook that you have at the bottom of the stairs, because
Yes.
I have, I don't have children. I have the whole basement to work in, and I just know how lucky I am. And I think the benefit of the home studio is that you can grab time here and there to work when you can, and that's really a good thing. And I just feel very lucky that I have I have a tiny house, a tiny Regina house. It feels small, but yeah, if if you can make work, the amount of beautiful works that you make in your little nook while you're waiting for more space, I think is really inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, like, for me as a painter, like, I don't need a big block of time. Like, sometimes I will just go for 20 minutes, or, right before I'm going to make supper, I've got half an hour. So that's why I like being at home, because the paintings are waiting for me, and I'll work on 5 or 6 at a time. Or even sometimes just go and sit and live with them and look at them and think, and then go do something else, and then come back. So they're sort of always with me and always on my mind and they're sort of like a part of my life, and that's how I've always been. I think that's why I struggled with the studio away, because they're away from me, what I was working on. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I just want to add, I like what you said about living with it, and there's that relationship you have with that space, and back and forth, and
Yeah.
also getting things done in increments.
Yeah.
And especially when you have other responsibilities or whatever, and then you can walk through and see something. Oh, I'll add that. That's the value, I think, of working at home. I think you get more work done, honestly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I do like having a little bit of separation. I did a series of embroidery works because I thought winter was coming and it would be nice to have something upstairs that I could watch on my big TV, watch, and it would feel more relaxing, but still be productive. But I did find that sometimes it's for life-work balance, you need to just separate and have, just watch a show without trying to multitask. I mean, we're all amazing multitaskers all the time. I'm going to come up on a really great picture here of Audie as we lead into that in a minute. But yeah, we'll come up onto that one. So Audie, can you talk a little bit about the difference between working with community versus working in solitude in your studio? Well, you just recently completed a City of Regina Artist in Residence, where you worked with Indigenous youth. How did that experience inform your own art practice? And have you had other residencies that have influenced your art making?
I think this is such a good follow-up question to the studio conversation, because right now, when I'm in my studio, I'm really solitary, and I find it to be super duper difficult. But when I'm at home and I know my partner is in the same house, even I can really get my butt in gear a lot better. And I feel that really is kind of the same when I'm working on projects, when it's just something that I'm exploring independently. The process can take a lot longer than something that is where you're working with others. And I think that's because the conversation's always kind of moving and flowing, and that really is helpful with moving projects along. So this piece here is what I created with my artist in residence with the City of Regina. I did the Indigenous Artist in Residence last year, and the theme was urban indigeneity. And so part of that residency is I created a new work independently, but then there was also a community aspect, which we created or we proposed on our own. So I proposed to work with a group of younger Indigenous artists that were really just kind of exploring their interests in art. And so I worked with 4 youth ages 14 to 17 over the span of a couple of months, and we met bi-weekly to talk to other artists, local artists, who would talk about, their practice, just so the youth could kind of get to see the differences in practices. But mostly we just really tried to visit and spend time together doing beadwork. So I taught each one of them the stitch that I used to create this piece, which is called a brick stitch, and it's with size 11 beads, seed beads. So if you have seen beadwork, that's kind of the average size bead. And this piece is about 24 inches by like 28 inches-ish. So like not super large, but quite substantially sized for like really repetitive small movements in the beadwork stitch. And this piece is actually a combination of two different photos of the sky. So I took a photo of the sky in the city, in my backyard, at the exact same time that my auntie took a photo of the sky in Lebret, which is the community that my Métis family is from. And of course, it's the same sky, but it's in like different geographical locations, and there is that like difference between urban life and like more bush life, I suppose. And then there's other kind of like binaries in those two photos. And what I did is I edited them together so that they don't totally flow together like super well, but I didn't really want them to, because I wanted it to represent, you know, like a very prairie blue sky with clouds, but then I also wanted it to look kind of like off and weird so that the viewer could be kind of like led into that conversation of like two different skies. And really like the point I'm trying to make, or the point I was thinking about, is how the sky is the same no matter where we are located geographically. And it's the same with indigenous life. Like I think a lot of people think that because you're in a city, you're like less indigenous, which feels like silly to say, but it is like a point of conversation for a lot of folks. Or like, and then even just like the differences in land and relationship to land based on if you're like within your home community versus like within like a larger city location. So this is also something I talked a lot about with the youth, is like urban indigeneity, if they kind of like thought about that, or if it just kind of like is what it is. So I'll go to the next slide. This is the pieces that the youth had made. So 3 artists completed their works, and we had like a big exhibition at the end at the Mama-Weyatatin Center. And you can see like each artist completed their work and like got to exhibit at this opening. We had an opening where I showed my work alongside their work because, you know, like we worked on it together throughout our time spent together over the like 4 or 5 months. And for a lot of them, this was like the first piece that they have completed, and also like the first piece that they were able to like exhibit to a wide audience. We invited like quite a few people, maybe some of y'all were there. And it was just like super exciting to create a space where they could explore that. The artists were Sophie Fisher, Lilla Fayant, and Colby Mountain Horse. Can I go to the next slide? And then this is just like another detail shot of one of the pieces. And so this artist was thinking about like the tabs of like pop cans. And I'm not gonna like explain it too much. But when you get up close, you can like really see the image kind of shine. It's harder here because it's like farther away. And then the next image is just an installation shot of all of our works together. This is at City Hall right now. So this is where the project kind of lives until it finds its forever home, which is part of the overall project. Yeah, I think I have one more slide. Oh yeah, and then this is just like a shot of like the youth listening to Jessie Short, who is like another local Métis artist. And I just really love this photo because we were able to use the Mama-Weyatatin Elders Room. And so it's like a circular space. We were able to smudge in there, and there you have like these really beautiful bison hides that we just set up and like sat on the floor and got to like hang out. And like I think a lot of people think community-based stuff is like really like special and sacred, and like in a lot of ways it is, but honestly, like with the youth, we just kind of talked about our favorite Netflix shows, and They were really cute because they're in high school, and you know, like how high school students always like draw on their shoes. Have you noticed that? Like they all had that, and I was like just asking them about their doodles. But yeah. Oh yes. This is me and my baby, and he's I think only like 2 months old here. So in the middle of my artist in residence, I gave birth to my son, and was continuing to like finish this project. And like this is my first kid, so I was like, it's gonna be fine. Like I'm gonna be at home. What else? Like the kid's gonna be sleeping. And it was not that. But the work got done, and this is kind of how the work got done. I just wanted to like add this photo because we were talking about community, and so like community can be like a really, you know, on the nose thing where you're working with specific people within the city or whatever community is for you. But then also I think like just within the home, like all of that love and story goes into the beadwork as well. So it was a really special time to be able to complete this project in such a transitional, like new point in my life. Mm-hmm.
Did anyone else have a thing they want to speak about, like working with community? Or I'm not a community working. I used to work in community, but now I tend to work on my own bodies of work at home in the studio. How about you, Sylvia?
I've been doing Carfact mentorships for the longest time now, and that's something I really enjoy. But working, and actually I've done a lot of workshops as well whenever I have a show, so I'll do stuff with youth groups, and I've done things at the Mackenzie with their youth group programs. It's not my first thing. I seem to get pulled into things, and I love people, so if there's an opportunity, I just find myself in it sometimes. And it's good.
I think you're a natural connector person. You always socially like to bring artists together and interact on a social level, which is always appreciated, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do. Well, I like people. I like this community in particular. I really like Regina, just the way artists interact with each other and the stuff that happens. And when you do, you bring 2 or more people together, stuff happens, and it's great, right?
So how about you, Debbie?
I think my main kind of focus with it was with my daughter, who is artistic like me, and it's kind of a thing in our family. Like the women have always been creative, like my grandma and my mom and myself, and we sort of encourage it to always be kind of making things, always work with your hands and create something. And my daughter is really quite a good drawer and very graphic. And so when she was, 14.
I think I got the slides. I'm going to skip ahead, so forgive my skipping, but we'll go back to the other ones. But you're going to talk about this.
Yeah. So there was a call out in Regina here for the Memorial Bridge, or Albert Street Bridge, and that you could submit a mural. So, and my daughter, being underage, she couldn't officially apply, but I thought, well, we could do this. Like, I know how to paint large scale, how to do murals, and she can draw. So I just really encouraged her to come up with the drawing. And I said, well, let's just submit it and see what happens. And they accepted it. And so, we worked on it for 2 days and got it done. So that was fun, because it kind of reminded me of how my parents would work with me and kind of kick my butt. And it's like, keep going and get the job done. And because it was a big job for us to do that. And then we also did a bench on 13th Avenue for the Cathedral Village Arts Festival. So again, I encouraged her to apply, and she did a drawing, and then I helped her paint it. And then where we live in our back alley, we've done 3 back alley murals to sort of dress it up. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm going to skip back to the last question I'm going to ask everyone here, which is talking about when you make an artwork that's particularly personal, whether it's obvious to the viewer or not, does it affect your willingness in how that work might become visible, whether it's in a specific type of gallery, or if it's going to potentially go to a private collector or a public collection? So I asked the artists if they had any examples of artwork that they're particularly happy went to a special collection, or to talk about work that they were less willing. So Sylvia, I'm going to start with you, a painting I'm very familiar with.
Okay, so this piece has so many layers. I'll try to keep it very simple. But this was a painting that was bought by the Sask Arts Board, or Sask Arts, they're called now, which was really awesome. It was great. It was, for me, a very personal process to make this work, because the painting didn't start out to look like this. I had done a lot of miniature work with animals, animal-human hybrids, playing cards, and they'd usually be playing cards at the end of the world, having fun, and there'd be circus tents and whatnot. But at the same time that I began this painting, we lived next to the legislative building. And in 2018, when I made this, there were teepee encampments that had started at the legislative building. And each year after that, too, there was Idle No More, I think there was Justice for Our Stolen Children, there was Tristan DeRocher's trip from Orange.
Walking with our angels, or
Yeah. I mean, there were so many things that were always happening in terms of the conflict and discussions between Indigenous folk and the history of colonization and the legislature. Like, it was just like a central thing happening there. So I would go over and walk over there with my husband, and we'd visit with people and talk with them. But it became, for the personal thing for me was, what is my role as an artist and as a white settler, historically a settler person on this land? How do I figure all this stuff out? How do I learn, what's going on? What is my part? And so while I was painting this, the rabbits came up and they're playing cards, but they're white rabbits. The teepees were like teepees going on into the distance, like forever. And the composition is based on the next slide, which is a European painting done in the 1600s, Georges de Latour, and it's the card sharp with the ace of diamonds. So he's cheating, right? They're having a nice game of cards, but somebody's cheating. So this idea of being cheated of land, but playing it as a game, that was inserted into the painting. It just kind of flowed into the painting. So these rabbits are, making a deal here, but we're gonna, cheat here. And so that idea of cheating is as humanly old as dirt, but that's part of that whole colonization thing. But now these are not things that I wanted to put into a painting and say, oh, well, this is what this is about, or anything like that. But it just came through me, and it was a process. It was a deeply personal painting for me, just to figure out for myself what's going on, asking questions and trying to figure things. So it was really awesome that it became part of the Sask collection.
Yeah, it's part of a special project that's up where we talk about some of the art in the collection that Sherry Farrell-Rissette said some art has work to do. I think this piece is doing work right now. It's up on display at the RCMP as a TRC project. We brought in a lot of artwork Indigenous, non-Indigenous, to The information about the painting is up, and the cadets in their learning environment will get to appreciate it for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So, sitting alongside another an Indigenous art by Lionel Peichu about games as well. So quite layered.
Yeah.
And tell us about this one.
Oh, this also, I mean, if you're talking personal, was just a painting that I did for myself. It's called Ziemann Rabbits. So my heritage is German, and my last name means Pullman. And it's the people on the other side of the saw going back and forth, right? And I like that idea of two people or two rabbits, you know, giving and taking back and forth to work something out, to make something happen. So this is actually my logo on my website. And I had not, it was in a show, and it was on the cover of a catalog, and Christine Ramsey from the film department at the university fell in love with it and just had to have it. So she owns that now. So it's really nice when you're doing personal work and you're not sure if it should go out there. It's kind of like birthing. You know, the painting or the artwork changes as it goes out into the world, and then people look at it and they have different meanings for it, and it becomes its own thing. But when people want an artwork and it's meaningful to them, it's awesome. Yeah.
Okay, Audie, do you want to talk about this work?
Yeah, so this piece, along with the next few slides, are kind of part of a series of photographs. And so this piece in particular is called For Hambone, Métis Billy Stick. It is a work that I have made. So the billy stick is like an old school English term for like a police baton. And my grandpa, my mushum, had like made one as a joke, like in a satirical way. He made this object called that he called a Métis billy stick. So this is like very personal kind of inside story to my family. It's not a story for like Métis people in general or like Indigenous people in general. But when he passed away, my mom kept the billy stick, and the reason why this object exists is because you keep it by your front door in case of an intruder, like the same way that maybe you'd keep a hockey stick there or a baseball bat. I don't know if we all do this, but my family does. And I thought this kind of like, it was just so artsy and like layered and like just a really interesting object. And I really wanted to like use my privilege as like someone that is able to make art and like share my art with the public to kind of bring this object forward, because I know a lot of my ancestors are artists but weren't able to like navigate these spaces in the same way that I can. So this Métis billy stick, it's not like my grandpa's the object my grandpa made. I remade it as a way to try and like connect to him through like the creation of materials. So I made this my own version of a Métis billy stick. And then I also created a sheath to go along with it, because as most of us know, a sheath is like something that holds an object like a gun or a knife, like these utilitarian objects that are also like violent in a way, which was very much like a billy stick. So I made this sheath to hold the billy stick. And designed it really very specifically for my mushum. His nickname was Hambone because he was like a silly guy. So that's why there's a hambone on the sheath. But this is shown sometimes as like a sculptural object in spaces that make sense. So it showed at Radical Stitch because, you know, this is my home territory. I have a lot of family here. And so showing it in that space, I knew that it would like feel comfortable there as an object. But if the work wants to show in a different space that is like really unfamiliar, I'll show it as a photograph. And so the photograph in this way really acts as like a lens of protection, like in a literal way, because it's creating a lot of distance between like the artwork and the viewer. And in that way, I'm able to keep like the physical object with me in my studio. So I'll go to the next slide. It's similar with this piece. So this piece is, I'm not going to say it out loud. I don't know why. I feel a little shy swearing. But in a similar vein, all of these objects in this photograph are composed by me and put together. But the violin head, again, was given to me. My grandpa was a fiddle player and would refurbish fiddles. And so I got a box of just like fiddle parts that I'd never know what to do with them. And I kind of use them to create quick sculptures. The pom-poms and wraparound are from wraparound mucklucks. And those are actually thrifted, so they're not family, but they are familial in the sense that like I like to buy Indigenous objects from thrift stores just because I like to give them a home where I like to think that they maybe feel like a little more comfortable. Yeah, thank you. I have a pretty good collection of stuff. And then the 6-pack rings are like beer rings, and they are actually beaded with like a neon orange, kind of playing into this dichotomy of the visible and the invisible. So it's really kind of like all put together, a bit of like a portrait, not a self-portrait, but like a portrait of community, I suppose, in a way. And this is shown as a photograph for the same reason as for Hambone Métis Billy Stick. And again, more photography. So like these, I'm not going to explain this work in detail, but I will say like these are hammerstone rocks, which are very, very old utilitarian objects used by Indigenous people, mostly on the plains. You can find them in archives and museums, but then you can also like come across them just anywhere. So one of these rocks was gifted to me by my father, who found it in the alley behind our house. And he lives in the North End, which is like so special. And then the other rock was gifted to me by an uncle who found it in the valley. And so I have these pieces, and I made these sculptures using them and like a beaded daisy chain that I had made myself. But it felt really kind of cruel to put those objects in a space, thinking about them as like real living objects and how old they are, to anthropologize? No. To put this like lens of anthropology onto these objects again, like really kind of felt like it was saying the opposite of what I wanted to say as an artist. So instead, because I am an artist and I do want to show, like my work to like a larger population of people, I really love that part of my practice. I chose to show them again as photographs. And these ones are very large. They're like 6 feet wide by 12 feet tall. Yeah. I think that's all the photos I have. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Debbie?
Well, I've always enjoyed being in a show, and I've always been thrilled with sales. So, and this one is fairly personal. And so actually it depicts the barn on our farm that nobody actually lives there anymore. So it's starting to really age. And yeah, it's kind of so through color, sort of elevating it and making it, I don't know, how it is in my heart.
A little bit sacred, right?
Yeah, it's sort of the love I have for it. Yeah.
And I don't think I have that one, but I own a similar painting.
Yes,
we did a trade, Debbie and I, so that's a good way artists can share each other's work. So tell us a bit about when you moved into the elevators.
So this was for a show, I believe. It was either 2017 or 2019, and it was my first attempt at painting elevators. So for years I had wanted to paint them, but I didn't know how to do it. And it was like I didn't know how to express it in my way with color and to make them interesting and different. And then I got this idea of, so it was 3 elevators, and this was the first one. And it always stuck in my head what my dad would say about farming. He always said, you know, the best years of farming were in the 60s and 70s, and even a bit into the 80s too, where he could actually make a living and provide for his family and enjoy it and not be too hard on the land or have to clear the fields completely to make a living. And so it always stuck with me, and those colors of those time periods. So it made me think, like, even though the photo is of a very old elevator and that's all that's left of it, the town's gone, the elevators, you know, probably will be gone someday, but just through color, I wanted to transform it and turn it into something that speaks to how I feel about it in my heart. And I was really pleased when I displayed these at the Assiniboia Gallery, and all 3 of them sold. So that, you know, kind of like inspired me to keep going with it, to not be afraid to explore that subject matter.
Yeah, and this piece I'm also familiar with is one of the newer pieces we've purchased from you, which is in the Saskard's collection.
Yeah.
All the artists up here are in the collection, so...
Yeah, I was really pleased with this sale as well, because that was my first painting of sort of like machinery. And as a child, we always had abandoned threshing machines, like whether you went to somebody else's farm or even the school I went to, there was an abandoned one way far back in the playground that we could play in. And so it was always in my mind that these things intrigued me so much. And the way they look, almost like part animal and parts are wood. And yeah, like they're not quite like the slick machines that are now. And they look like they're fixable, and you can see all the parts. And farmers used to be able to fix them. They could take off any part and figure it out. Like, it was kind of like a simpler technology. So yeah, I was really pleased with this sale too.
Great. And I think those are the last images. So we'll just have, what time is it? We have maybe like a time for, if anyone had one question, maybe, or, oh, Vanessa. Okay, so I'm going to repeat so they can hear. So Vanessa's asking, when you have a personal, intimate narrative in your work, do you do anything to kind of protect yourself, I guess, but when you incorporate that into something that will eventually probably be public?
I could say that, so as I paint, it's sort of like therapeutic for me. So I'm always putting myself into all the paintings. And I think the way I protect myself is actually showing in commercial galleries. So I'm not always there and always have to explain what it's about. And it's my own story in that painting, but I make it in such a way that it can be anybody's story. And, you know, like it might mean a certain something to me, but it might be something totally different to somebody else, and then to somebody else. So playing with just sort of imagery that speaks to people, and then colors speak to people. So I think that's how it's just, I guess, in the home it's me, and it has its story, but then when it's out of the home, it's maybe a story to somebody else. So.
I would say what happens with me is I just make stuff, and I work unedited. If I'm mad or if I'm confused about something or tired. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll make something. And then if it's very personal, nobody else sees it, right? So that's how I protect it, right? But sometimes something will come out like the playing the game painting, which just worked itself into itself. And then you go, okay, yeah, you're all right to go out, right? You can go out into the world. And what you said about having to explain it, that makes me nervous. I didn't want to have to explain that painting. You know, it's like, it needs a longer conversation than just, you know, the 2 minutes up here about it. So it's, sometimes though the work, I think, asks to be out in the world, and it says, I gotta be out there, I gotta do this, you know? And it's like children, again, where they're like, okay, Mom, I don't need you anymore, I can go out into the world, I'm doing this job on my own, and I'm out of here. And then you let that artwork go. So there is no protection anymore, you just go, okay, whatever happens, happens. Somebody likes it, somebody wants to talk about it, it's an important work, then, you know, it goes. So, but there are, like for me, some works that I just like do, and then I'm like, burn it, you know, like, or rip it up. But it's part of the process that leads to other work too, right? So it's all important, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of what has been said so far, and I think like ultimately I just remind myself that like this is artwork and I do want to share it, and not everyone's going to be able to like read the personal narratives that go into it. I've been like reflecting on an experience I had recently where I also work with like gloves, used workers' gloves, and I do beadwork on them to kind of like tell different stories or experiences. So each pair of gloves, you know, is its own work within a body of work. And I had made a pair of gloves that I thought of as like celestial baby catching gloves. And it's very much like, I was very much thinking about, you know, like the process of having like a new generation that I will be like living with quite closely and intimately. And so of course it's like super personal, but it's also, it's art. And I was talking to a curator, it's art that I want to share. Like I want to share this work with people. And I was talking to a curator and she was asking me if I had anything available to purchase. And I brought up these gloves, which we have in our house because I just like, you know, I love them. I love like all my work. They are kind of like my babies, similar to like what the two of you have said. But the curator just kind of like thought the work was too like personal. She was like, "Do you want to give those up?" And I was like, I guess I never thought about like a work being too personal, or just having someone else put that kind of like thought process onto like what I'm willing to share. I thought was like really interesting, and just like something that I haven't experienced before. But at the end of the day, I was like, yeah, I do want them to like live in a collection and be in conversation with other artworks. You know what I mean? So I guess like just believing in myself to like know my boundaries and like what I want to share and what I want to just like share with nobody except for myself. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I think we share experiences as human beings. So even though it might be personal to you, it's most probably an experience other people have experienced as well. You know, not always the same, but I'd like to think in this world that's the good thing we have going for us is things we have in common, not things that separate us. So, yeah. So I think artwork can be a really great bridge for that. Yeah. Any other questions? I feel like I've done a long day today, so I'm feeling a bit tired. But I really would like to thank our artists today for coming. It was a great conversation. You're all really inspiring artists. I always walk away from art talks feeling filled up and inspired, and I appreciate the efforts involved in sharing with us today. So thank you.